popular neocon commentators like Robert Kaplan would go out there and say, as he did on television and in a book he wrote, saying, we need to be like Tiberius. We need a pagan ethos. We need to go out there and do what the Romans did. But we couldn't do that. And we didn't do that. And we were ineffective. We fought these long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan for nothing.
This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius, John Batchelor. I welcome Germanicus, Michael Vlahos. We are in Londinium. It is the late summer of 91 AD. We're by the Thames drinking our cup of wine before we go to the theater. We're told there'll be Aeschylus tonight. We'll see. That is a Tony presentation. It attracts the high society of Londinium. Londinium, by the way, is heavily occupied by retired centurions who are paid very well in land and honor for their 25 years service in the Legion. They have families. Their families have bundled up their groceries. They're headed home. We are very secure. We're far from Rome. We relax, although we don't write anything down. We're not that relaxed. We're Aeschylus. We're not worrying about the Senate at all tonight. We're concerned with events that happen in the 21st century. The Senate has its battles with our emperor, but that's not our concern. Our concern is the battle that's forthcoming between the very well-known and colorful and sometimes underestimated Donald Trump, former president of the United States, and his challenger, who is fresh to the American people. She is now Vice President, Kamala Harris, former DA of San Francisco, former Attorney General of California, now Vice President, who has been catapulted onto the world stage when President Biden stepped aside from his own reelection campaign and passed the baton, the torch, to Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has been presenting herself, especially to the swing states, the 7 swing state audiences these last weeks. The President Trump has been concentrating on major media, and he's always ready to talk to his voters in these rallies that he insists upon having. One rally was a near tragedy. It was a tragedy because there were deaths in the audience when a young man tried to assassinate him. However, we come to the big moment, the debate. To our knowledge, it'll be the only debate. And the question of how Kamala Harris is going to present herself. She gets advice from her own campaign and from voices at the Financial Times out of London that it's an opportunity for her to define herself, to introduce herself to the American people. There are other voices saying she must do well in order to regain the momentum she had right after Mr. Biden named her as his successor on the campaign trail. I note just at this moment, with hours to go till the debate begins, the New York Times Siena poll, closely watched, just one poll, but it's closely watched, now has Mr. Trump 1 point ahead, which the FT interprets as tie. However, Germanicus, a very good evening to you. The Financial Times also puzzles this question. Will Ms. Harris take this opportunity to present herself and not ignore, but not respond to Mr. Trump's remarks? Or will she be contentious and battle him and go for a clear win? I remind everybody that Hillary Clinton in 2016 won all 3 debates, and you know the outcome. So, good evening to you, Germanicus. How do you measure Cleopatra, Kamala Harris, on the debate stage? Good evening.
Good evening, Gaius. This is a wonderful opportunity to draw what I think is a stark contrast. Our Cleopatra, the historical Cleopatra of memory, was a redoubtable, remarkable woman, a tremendous leader, and a savvy strategist. Her situation was almost impossible, as the historical record ultimately shows. She was the pharaoh of the last of the Hellenistic kingdoms, and Rome was going to take over. And she managed twice to find riposts, strategic riposts to save that Hellenistic kingdom and actually make it an independent actor of its own in the Eastern Mediterranean. First with Julius Caesar, second with Mark Antony. With Julius Caesar, her first attempt was to insinuate herself into the Roman oligarchy and ruling class of optimates, and it was not possible. She was an alien, Greek queen, and they would have none of it. With Mark Antony, however, he was wholly committed to her. She was able to seduce him into making a compact to create an Eastern Roman Empire, which 400 years later would be realized as a Greek Roman Empire, as one of the great Byzantine historians has called it. And in effect, she just couldn't do it that early. Rome was too powerful, and she couldn't, even with Antony, come up with an effective way to realize her vision. Now, she went all out, and she came close. The momentum that would be there 400 years later was not there in the last 50 years of the period before the watershed, whatever we want to call it, the end of the BC and the beginning of the AD times. But nonetheless, she stands out, and stands out powerfully in historical memory because she was willing to go out there and give it her all. And that was really the only option she had. Now, contrast that with Ms. Harris, who has been not simply appointed or selected, she has been picked up and put into a situation that she could never possibly have inhabited through her own exertion. She was first plucked for dubious reasons to be vice president, and then found herself in a position of being the presidential candidate. And effectively, which is to say, not effectively, she's a very weak candidate. And what we know as Romans is that Roman emperors had to be able to show their effectiveness. They had to legitimate their rule. They had to not only show their authority, but make it manifest, and thereby prove themselves and gain legitimacy, which is why so many Roman emperors were generals, why so many Roman emperors put themselves out there and died in battle. And we won't go through all of the list, which is rather long. And it is very hard in Roman history, but also in our own history, to have a leadership that is effectively an imperial leadership that is a hollow papier-mâché puppet of a leader. And unfortunately, Americans have lived through the last nearly 4 years with just such a leader, a hollow papier-mâché leader selected by the oligarchs, and he blew up in a debate. And now the backup, who is herself not a proven leader in any sense, is going up into the same kind of existential theater, almost as an impossible audition. Now, she may perform well, but the fact is, in the one debate where she tanked as a presidential candidate, she was literally torn apart by Tulsi Gabbard, and in a matter of 90 seconds. And that was all over for Kamala. And Tulsi Gabbard is the primary person preparing Mr. Trump for the debate. Now, who knows if he'll really listen to what she has to say, but the fact is that he is a man of decision. He's put himself out there. He's taken enormous risks. He's endured unbelievable assaults endlessly, which have only, in fact, made him stronger. And here she is as, again, another papier-mâché person. And the fact that she is being positioned and counseled by the people who selected her means that they will play it safe. She is not in a position to be Cleopatra. If she were somehow to break the mold, if she were to sort of throw her advisors aside, take the stage, and assert herself, things would be potentially different. I mean, in other words, she's not a Hillary Clinton. She is, again, I keep using the metaphor of the paper mache figure because she is like a doll, like a puppet, and there is no way, I think, that she can claim the allegiance of Americans who at this point are very attuned to the falseness of everything stemming from government and media after nearly 4 years of Mr. Biden. She cannot claim their allegiance unless she does stand up.
And so you see her playing this safe and not
I don't think she's in a position to it's
I
a
just
terrible cliche, but I don't think she's allowed to have agency. If somehow she breaks out and claims that, which other monarchs and emperors in past times have done, they've been put in situations and then they take charge. Like in our own times, just 50 years earlier, that's what the Emperor Claudius did. He was seen as a fool, and yet being put in a position of being selected as emperor, he then took charge in an amazing display of agency. But she would have to do something comparable, and they will not allow it because this is a totally controlled
right.
oligarchic campaign.
We're in Londinium. The centurions are bustling home with their families, everybody happy. These are retired centurions, great stories. We're sitting perhaps too long. It's cooler now. It's late summer in Londinium. But we're enjoying ourselves because we can see the future. We've been looking at the 21st century in terms of the fleeting politics of the American empire. We now turn to the moment the Russian Empire is taking to regain its strength. I've been reading about the moments in late 1916, early 1917, when Nicholas, the Tsar, abdicated, resigned, stepped aside, surrendered. There are many words for it. After that, it was just fall down the steps for the Russian Empire. So eventually it came to the point where the army deserted, quit, lynched their own officers, walked away because the army had sworn allegiance to the Tsar, not to the state, not to the Duma, not to someone elected, but to the Tsar, who was understood to be Russia, the man who gave the orders that all ranks acted upon, not just the officer class. Now we have a Tsar in the Kremlin, a man who exercises complete authority to the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin. The question I have for Germanicus, reading about these events of 1916, 1917, is Putin in a position to regain the empire? Empires in memory don't die. They can be dormant. They can regenerate themselves. There is reason to believe that democracy is now under severe review everywhere, not just in America or Europe, but also in the continent of South America and the continent of Africa, everywhere. Do we swear allegiance to someone who is elected willy-nilly by majority? Or do we swear allegiance to the king, the emperor, the center of our allegiance? Germanicus, it's a question that comes. Is Putin regaining the empire? Is that the plan he has in mind? To go back to that moment in 1917 and take the pen out of Nicholas's hand?
That is certainly the beloved narrative of the oligarchy in the United States, which desperately wants to refashion and sculpt Russia today as the lineal descendant of the czars, sort of leaving the Soviet Union just out of the picture as a interregnum. And the fact is, we have to remember they're empires and then they're empires. And my sense is, at looking at the sweep of histories, that long established dynasties are weaker and more brittle at maintaining and directing power. And no better example than Russia after Catherine the Great, and then a succession of strong czars after her, Alexander the First, Nicholas the First, Alexander the Second. It was a powerful dynasty, but it was at the mercy of a weak czar, just as the prodigiously successful French dynasty that had Louis XIV, then Louis XV, two immensely long reigns of kings who created, by dint of their long reigns, incredible stability. And then a feckless guy comes in, not really in some ways so different from Nicholas II. That would be, Louis XVI. And this is not the pattern that you see in the Roman Empire, because, and I can't emphasize this enough, Russia was a monarchy. France in the period of the Bourbons was a monarchy, but Rome was an empire, and every Roman emperor had to prove his efficiency, his effectiveness. He had to create the legitimacy around him or he wouldn't last, and he had to prove himself every day. It was not an easy situation. And frankly, the United States is very reminiscent of Rome, because we have, in the same way that Rome did, in a funny way, it's not exactly parallel, but it's very resonant. And that is that American emperors, called presidents, are elected, but almost in the same way that Roman emperors were elected. And Roman emperors who were not strong, who failed, they were gone in an instant. There are many Roman emperors who lasted days, months, maybe a year and a half. And it was a tough road. And the same is true, as we've seen recently, in American presidents. And this is ultimately the story with Russia today, because Putin very much resembles a Roman emperor. He does not resemble a dynast of long established kingship as the Romanovs did. He's a guy who made it on his own, like a lot of Roman emperors did, coming up from very humble beginnings. He was not a super, prince like Xi is in China. He's a princeling. But Putin was just another guy who managed, through his own capability, to become emperor, like a lot of Roman emperors, like a lot of American presidents. And what Putin is doing, and the reason he has such support from Russia, is that Russia has had to go through much of the soul-searching recreation of their own identity. They can't go back to the Soviet Union, obviously, and they don't want to go back to Tsar's times. Why would you want to do that? They're looking to be something modern and something uniquely Russian. And Putin has been able to create that. I mean, that's really what Napoleon did. Napoleon wasn't a king. He created the idea of the emperor as a merit-based rule. And we have to understand that most Americans and Brits who hate Napoleon don't understand how successful he was at creating and instigating an ongoing process of French reintegration and transformation of identity. And that's what Putin is doing. And we don't want to give him any credit for that, because we want him to be Mr. Evil, Dr. Evil. But the truth of the matter is, he is recreating a concept of Russia that is not simply de novo, and yet at the same time, not simply an imperial renovatio of the czarist state from the past. It is a federative state that seeks to be great on its own terms, on its own territory. And it isn't all Russian, it's a federation of many peoples. And it actually has been shown in this war to work. And we don't want to say that it's working, and yet it has been working. And in many ways, it doesn't look all that different from the United States, where you have a nation of many peoples as well. And it's really funny that we cannot bring ourselves to see this when it's staring us in the face.
Will we make peace with him once Ukraine bends the knee and Novorossiya is Russia again? Will another president make peace? We have a minute.
Yeah. We won't bend the knee. What we'll do is we'll create a different narrative, and we'll memory hole the old story of, Russia being democratized by the US and all the rest of that, which is not going to happen. And we'll find a way to get out, because we can't stay in a situation where we are occupying a position of defeat and failure. So we'll get out, we'll create a new narrative, we'll find a place for rump Ukraine in the EU, and then we'll find a way to reconnect with Russia. I just think that's the outcome. But it has to be made in a series of many baby steps, because you don't just discard the narrative that you've convinced Americans to buy into with something very different. So it's going to take some time.
Germanicus, we've been talking about the Dacians that frustrate our emperor, Domitian. And we know that he bribes them and doesn't have the confidence to leave Rome to lead an army and the Danube. The Dacians are a strong people. They're not barbarians. They're tall and blue-eyed and red-headed, and they're very good metal workers. They make swords and knives to be envied. They have a fortress in the mountains that will one day be called the Carpathian Mountains. And we know that once Trajan is emperor, he will settle the score, because there will be rebellion and the Dacians will throw off the money they've been paid and start raiding our outposts again. So they have to be resolved. And the way Trajan resolved them is to point the legions at Sarmagatusa, Regia, their capital, built in the mountains. And because that has value, it has a sacred site. And he told the army to destroy it. And the army did. They destroyed it in a typical Roman fashion. They didn't storm the gates. They built a wall all the way around it and starved it to death. And then they took the population, killed the men, sold the women and children into slavery, and reduced it stone by stone. So much so that in the 21st century, it's a ghost of a city in a national forest in Transylvania. But that style worked for America's empire once upon a time. In the First War, we pointed our legions at the Germans and broke them. Even more so in the Second War, we pointed our legions at Tokyo and broke them, at Berlin and broke them. One presumes if there is another way of talking about America, we would take it, but that's what happened. We were bloody-minded, and it worked. That is the Roman style that attracts us, Roman citizens, from 2,000 years before. However, I read you an item that comes in from the Washington Post in these last hours. The army is fighting to find recruits in a mistrustful, divided nation. Subhead, recruiters are contending with a confounding array of political, social, and economic crises that have made it harder than ever to find citizens willing to serve. At a recruiting station on the Jersey Shore, Sergeant First Class Dane Beeston and his colleagues aren't just selling a job, they're selling America. Germanicus, this is a way of talking about an empire that's lost its ability to be pointed at something and say, destroy it? Will America regain its balance? Will it be worthy of being an empire? We have a few minutes.
Anything is possible. But if we remain the kind of country we are today, nothing good is going to happen. Now, again, a contrast with Rome. Rome had a republican ethos in which all citizens served in the military. The army was the people. That was, in fact, the essential compact of the early American Republic. It was the nation in arms. Every citizen, a free male adult citizen of property, had to muster with the militia. He was armed. Now, this was Rome, this was America, and it was that militia vision and tradition that carried us to victory in World War I and World War II, and also before that, the Mexican War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War. But the truth of the matter is, Rome, when the Republic ended, created a professional military. And the US, in the wake of the disaster of Vietnam, created what amounts to a professional military. It's the same thing. We called it an all-volunteer force, but essentially, of course, you have a professional military. The recruits volunteer. It was just a sleight of hand to not look too imperial. But the fact is, Rome had an imperial army, and that Roman imperial army, and any good history you read of the Roman army of the empire, was terrific. And it was not a big army, but it was incredibly effective. And it could lose legions like the 3 legions under Varus, or the lost 9th Legion in Britain, or, we can go on, the disastrous defeat at Dura Europus in the 3rd century. But the fact is, this was an army that was motivated and focused and absolutely merciless, as you just described in Dacia. Our army is become a kind of lifestyle alternative for young people who want to get into the mainstream, who want training, and who want to seek out eventually better employment and a better life. That's for the enlisted. And for the non-commissioned officers and officers, it's a lifestyle that offers major rewards when they retire after 20 years and can go into the defense industrial system and make massive money with defense contractors while keeping their incredibly generous retirement and all medical expenses paid. So what you have is not a military as in a fighting force that the Romans had, but rather something very different. And that's essentially why we're fighting a proxy war in Ukraine, because the wars after 9/11 were not tenable. And so, just as an aside, right after 9/11, popular neocon commentators like Robert Kaplan would go out there and say, as he did on television and in a book he wrote, saying, we need to be like Tiberius. We need a pagan ethos. We need to go out there and do what the Romans did. But we couldn't do that. And we didn't do that. And we were ineffective. We fought these long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan for nothing. We lost a lot of people, and we could not find our way to being totally ruthless. Now, we were ruthless, and we were ruthless, especially in the defeat of ISIS in Mosul, where we killed, 30,000 plus people, mostly women and children. They happened to be the families of the ISIS fighters. But yeah, we were ruthless, but that was done from the air. We can't, as a nation now, go in and fight on the ground the way the Ukrainians are. They've lost hundreds of thousands of people. America is not in a position to fight that kind of war ever again. And when I was at the War College, during the period at the height of the GWOT, I had scores of field-grade officers who'd been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 8, 9, 10 times. And they were worn out and beaten down by what they experienced. And that, in the larger context has turned America into a place that cannot live up to the imperial idea because it is incapable of fighting imperial wars, for better or worse.
Germanicus and Gaius were on to the theater. We will sacrifice to Augustus on the way, of course. He's the one person we have no revisionist opinion of.
Right.
Put the empire together, and the empire is in fine shape here in 91 AD. I'm told we're going to see an Aeschylus play. I hope it's something positive. That would be Seven Against Thebes, where the brothers fight and kill each other. I like that part because they want to share the throne. That satisfies the Roman in me. And it's not especially preachy the way other Greek dramatists can be. This is the Friends of History Debating Society by the Thames. A little chilly. We'll wrap ourselves in the theater tonight. I'm John Batchelor.